Well, good morning, everyone. It certainly is good to be back up here presenting a lesson from God's Word with you guys this morning. I'm excited to share a report of how our recent evangelistic trip went to Belize, and I'm just going to hit the ground running this morning. So if you want to go ahead and be turning over to Acts chapter 4, I just want to point out a few passages from the book of Acts as we get started here this morning, because largely what I'm going to be doing is based off a pattern that we see throughout the New Testament. And I'm only going to cite a few references here. There could be a lot more that we look at. But in Acts chapter 4, we see how Peter and John, after they are released from prison, they come back and they report what had happened, kind of what their experiences were. And that's found in Acts chapter 4 and verse 23. It says, when they were released, they went to their friends and reported what the chief priests and the elders had said to them. And that kind of turns into a great prayer that they offer in that chapter. And you go over the chapter 11 in the book of Acts. The church at Jerusalem sends Barnabas. Barnabas is sent to visit what they hear about new Christians who are in Antioch. And so Barnabas is kind of sent to them and is kind of scouting things out there. And in verse 22 of Acts 11, it says, the report of this came to the ears of the church in Jerusalem, and they sent Barnabas to Antioch. And maybe you might remember that when Barnabas arrives in Antioch, he sees that these people are full of the Holy Spirit, that they've obeyed the gospel, and it's in Antioch that the disciples are first called Christians. And like I said, there's a lot of other passages that we could look at, other places in the New Testament where we see different preachers, where we see the apostles that are sent places to go and preach the gospel or visit brethren. And what that would do is it created opportunities where reports were shared of how Christians were doing, what the trip was like, how the gospel was received. And again, that's largely what I'm going to be doing here this morning. I want to give you a report about the work in Belize. And in doing that, I'm going to provide a little bit of context, even though I would hope that a majority of you are already familiar with some of the information that I'll share this morning. For instance, I hope you guys are aware that the Kaysville Church of Christ, right? We financially support 6 evangelists in the preaching of the gospel. 2 here locally in Kaysville, that would be myself and Caleb, but also 4 foreign evangelists. 1 in the country of Belize, 2 in Colombia, and 1 in Venezuela. And so, several of you have asked me, hey, why did you even go to Belize? There's a lot of ways to answer that, but I think one that was kind of the most pressing for why I decided to go to Belize is I wanted to continue to build my relationship with Abraham Jimenez, who is the preacher that we support in the country of Belize. I've gotten to know him and become, I would say, friends with him through WhatsApp. That's how we communicate internationally. We text frequently, and so we kind of have a simple friendship that way. And I was so thankful that on this trip I was able to go with Paul and Robin because they've already been to Belize several times. So they were able to kind of introduce me to other people, make those connections, so I didn't come there by myself, just basically like a stranger. I had people who they knew, and so that kind of helped me get settled in very, very nicely, and I'm thankful for that. Also traveling with us was Alton Bailey and his wife Dinah, and they're from Alabama, and I think, I had the picture qualities, I'm sorry, the images are going to look weird today. If you want them, just text me and I'll send you the pictures. But we'll make do with what we can in the lesson today. This was kind of the group of traveling companions for this trip. And so Alton and Dinah, I don't know how many times they've been, probably close to 20 times to Belize. And Paul and Robin have been more than a couple times themselves. And so thankfully they were able to kind of introduce me to different people, help me get more closer connected to the brethren there in Belize. But I want you to see how this affects you here at the church at Kaysville. This is a really important part of the lesson, kind of why I want to begin here. And that's over in Philippians chapter 4. Can you go ahead and be turning over there in Philippians chapter 4? That we as a church, we have a partner with the 6 men that we support in the preaching of the gospel, myself included. That we are in fellowship with one another. And fellowship, let's get this right. Fellowship is not gathering for a meal. We don't go do fellowship. Sometimes we use that word incorrectly. Right? But fellowship, rather, it's a relationship that exists. It's a partnership in the gospel, and specifically in the context of what we're talking about in this lesson, it's a partnership in the preaching of the gospel, the sharing of the good news. And Philippians 4 speaks to this idea. Philippians 4, let's read verses 14 through 18. It says, "Yet it was kind of you to share in my troubles. And you Philippians yourselves know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving except you only. Verse 16, even in Thessalonica, you sent me help for my needs once and again. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that increases to your credit. I have received full payment and more. I am well supplied, having received from Epaphroditus the gift you sent, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God." That's a really important passage. Really important passage. And notice what it teaches, that the church at Philippi had established a relationship with Paul in his preaching work. In the different places that he went and spreading the gospel. Verse 15 kind of puts it in a simple way, right? They gave and Paul received. And what did they give? It lets us know. They gave a gift. They gave financial funds to him so that he could be able to preach the gospel. And that formed a partnership in the work of saving souls. They sent a gift of funds to supply Paul's physical needs. But it wasn't that Paul was seeking the gift, right? No, he wanted the fruit that would increase from that gift. The benefit of the preaching of the gospel, right? That it would cause spiritual fruit to be born through the preaching of the gospel, through saving of souls. And so I hope as we read passages like Philippians 4 here, Philippians 4, 14 through 18, we kind of see how partnership between like a congregation and an evangelist that they would support and financially help. Isn't it cool then that that's what we're able to do today? That we participate in that we're following the biblical pattern laid out for us. That through the financial funds that we give to these individual men, and I think that's important to note, we don't support the church at St. Narciso. We support the evangelist. We support the man himself because that's what we read about in Scripture. That we're following the pattern laid out for us in the New Testament. And that makes all of us, in a sense, that we're partners with Abraham in Belize and the work that he's doing. And so that's why I think it's not just fitting that I give a report on the recent trip to Belize. I think it's important for you to have a better understanding, a clearer picture of what exactly is going on. What does the work in Belize look like? How is our brother Abraham doing? And I would hope someday, I know there are a lot of logistical hoops. This isn't going to happen overnight. This is probably way down the road. I would love for you guys to meet Abraham. And you might be thinking, well, how are we going to get everybody to Belize? That would be rather expensive. I think hopefully one day, maybe we can get Abraham and his family up here. Maybe we can get all the evangelists we support. Again, a lot of logistical hoops at that. The elders might be saying, oh, don't sign us up for that, right? There's a lot that's going to have to go into that. But Abraham is a great man, and I think you'll be encouraged to hear about the work that he is doing in Belize. And so let me put just a map of where Belize is, because several of you have said you don't even know where it is. And I'll admit, before I moved to Kaysville, Utah, I had no idea where Belize was either. Interesting thing about the country of Belize, you can kind of see its location there right on the coast of the Caribbean. It's roughly the same size and population as Davis County, Utah. It's just under 400,000 people, so not a super dense in the population of this country. And most of that population, about half, is in really two cities. Let's see if this thing is working here. Belopea, that's the capital, and then Belize City over there. Those are kind of the two main cities. Outside of that, there's not really big metropolitan cities like we're used to in the United States. A lot of people would maybe classify Belize as a third world country. Technically, it doesn't fit that definition. The surrounding countries around it, Guatemala and Honduras and Nicaragua, definitely are. And there's parts of Belize that are very poor. And we'll be talking about that today when we get into looking at San Narciso a little bit. But I will say going in the month of February was the way to do it. I've heard horror stories from those who have gone before. Not horror stories, but just how hot it can be in July and in the summer months. But remember the kind of the location of where Belize is. Just think south of Florida, right? You're like 250, 300 miles south of Miami. And so you're that close to the equator, they don't get a change of season, right? It's wet season and dry season, but it's hot all the time. And so when we were down there, there were a couple hot days, but for the most part, it was pretty nice weather. And some of you are looking at the snow around us like, oh, don't remind us. But it was great weather, thankfully, while we were down there. Not too unbearable from a heat standpoint. The national language of Belize is actually English. And so that's pretty important to know because a lot of the kids that go to schools there are taught English. And so most people, I'm not trying to speak too broadly here, but those probably 30 and under in Belize know English or can at least understand it. Those probably who are a little bit older might be hit or miss if they know English or not. So you can imagine how someone who is bilingual could come in handy, of which I am not. And we're going to talk about that. I have some videos, hopefully, that I can show you. But there were two main places that we went. And the first was Orange Walk. That was kind of our home base there. I think you can see it right there. Orange Walk was a decent-sized city. And it acted, again, as a kind of our home base for our time. It's a bigger city that has hotels, restaurants, gas stations, nothing, again, like what we're used to. But it was, by all means, very nice, comfortable place to stay. And the congregation there that is at Orange Walk, here's a picture of their building. It's a small group. Maybe about 10 to 15 people, probably closer to 10, more days than not. And we were able to worship with them on Sunday morning, and then also went there on Tuesday and Thursday for some Bible classes. But our focus and our time on this trip was definitely more emphasis on San Narciso and kind of what we were there to accomplish and who we were there to spend time with. But it was still an encouragement to be with the saints at Orange Walk Town, some solid families there. I actually overlapped in college with the son of one of the families there. So it was cool to kind of meet the parents, meet that family, and make that connection with them as well. And several of you will probably know this person. I know, again, that picture quality is quite poor, so I apologize. But there's a picture on the bulletin board of her. This is Leanne Metu. And so you've heard different announcements being made about her for over the past 2 years. And that's her mother, Lisbeth, who is standing next to her. Leanne and her mother and her family worship at Orange Walk Town. And so it was kind of like seeing a celebrity when we walked in. It's like, Leanne's here. And she just finished kind of getting the update from her mother and some of the members of that congregation. She just finished 18 sessions of radiation therapy. And so I believe she's 14 years old right now. So that's a lot to just kind of process. But they're hopeful that after this latest round of radiation therapy that they've been able to kind of kill off the tumor. That's the goal. And so it's kind of cool to see in the flesh someone that you've prayed about, someone you've never met. She's a real person. She exists, and she's there. And so it was encouraging to kind of meet her. And she's definitely one to be praying for about. She hasn't obeyed the gospel yet. And so although she's still a very young person, that's something to be praying about for her and her family and the saints there that influence her for good. And so, again, as I mentioned, kind of our focus was more on San Narciso, not as much Orange Walk Town. In San Narciso, if you're using Apple Maps, that's kind of what I tend to use, good luck. You're not even going to find it. It is a small community. It is on this map. You might be trying to find it. It's very hard to see. It's right there where kind of the center of that circle is, San Narciso, right in between Orange Walk Town and Corozal. So it's about a 35-minute drive from Orange Walk Town to San Narciso. And we did that just about every day. So we were doing that drive sometimes multiple times. And so it is a small, poor village. That's probably the best way to put it. Population is right about 2,500 people. And this is where Abraham, who we support, this is where Abraham is the evangelist at this small village community, this small church there. And I was so grateful. Let me put a picture of Abraham. That's Abraham and his family. Latasha next to him, and then his 2 boys, Marcos and then Benja. Abraham is wonderful, and so is his family. They are wonderful people. I was able to preach a lesson at San Narciso every time we met with the brethren there. And that was a unique opportunity to be able to speak. I've spoken a lot of different places in the U.S., but never out of the country. And so the preach with my brethren down in Belize, that was a cool opportunity, but I've also never used a translator before. So that was a new one. And one of the questions everybody asks is, so does that mean the sermons are twice as long? And to a certain extent, yes, but at the same time, no. Abraham has been doing this for about 20 years, working with different Americans that come down and kind of interpreting their lessons. So he's fluent in both, and we kind of get in a rhythm where he can anticipate when you're going to end the sentence. And we got going a few times, and so the sermons, no, they don't last twice as long. You can actually get in a flow, but it makes you think about every word you're going to say when you have a few seconds before you say it. And so it takes a second to get a hang of. Hopefully we can see if this works. Some of you, I said I'd try and have a video of this, so I just want to play just a snippet so you can see kind of how that works with the translator, what the lessons were like. So we'll see if the sound works. Would look like. And I know the audio may have been hard to hear, but Abraham will match your inflection. So when I would start to step out and really get into something, he would as well. And when I would get really quiet, he would too. And so it was fascinating to watch him be able to do that and just speak both languages just on the fly. I mean, what a gift, what a talent to be able to do that and using it for the Lord. Something about this trip, I was able to bring about 15 Bibles down with me. Abraham said there was a need for people who just didn't have Bibles. Mainly, they didn't have Bibles that were big enough, right? They don't have electronic Bibles, so they needed the super gigantic font is what it's called. So it's like size 18. And we were able to bring down about 8 of those massive Bibles. And it was encouraging while I was up preaching that first night. I saw a bunch of, mainly the older ladies, had those opened up, and they were using them right then. And so some of you were able to give funds to help with that, and thank you very much. It was cool to see that in action right away. But something that's also cool about their meeting place, they have a passage that is, I can't get the clicker to work, guys. There we go, thank you. They have a passage that's hanging above kind of where you would preach, right underneath it. There's a podium behind Abraham and I standing there. And it's John 13:35. And so that's part of what Asher read for us in the scripture reading. And Abraham said that one of the ladies there made that. She was able to kind of knit that herself, crochet that. I'm not sure the exact phrase there, right? But she made that, and they have that hanging there. And he said that's who they try and be. And I'm here to report to you that they do a pretty good job of that. They try and wear the name of Christ, and it's shown through their love for one another. And I have another video, but I know the sound won't really be able to bring this out. But their singing, I wish you could hear their singing. They only have about 40 to 50 people there at the church at San Narciso, and their singing is louder than what we do here with maybe 3 times as many of that. It is so passionate. And it doesn't mean we should just sing loud to be the loudest, right? But you can sense the energy with which they sing. Okay, well, we'll give it a try and see if this one will work. you were even humming that. You were able to pick up on what the song is. Trust and obey. And the cool thing is when they will lead their songs, they'll do 2 in English and 2 in Spanish. The service there at San Narciso is done bilingually, both in Spanish and in English. A lot of the Spanish, when they sing the Spanish hymns, people won't even take like songbooks out. And that's because they have all the songs memorized. They have about 120, and they know all of them. And so they just sing from the heart, and you can tell. I mean, it's such a refreshing thing to hear. But something else that kind of sticks out about the group, I tried to pick the picture that got kind of the majority of the congregation in one shot. But a lot of this congregation is first-generation Christians. And I think that's something we take for granted here in the United States and even among our congregation here at Kaysville. That as a result, the quality, and this is not me like patting myself on the back, the quality of our sermons and our Bible classes, the Lord's Supper talks, there's so much more depth in what we're able to bring out compared to our brethren in Belize. As a result of not having from resources and parents who are Christians and maybe grandparents who are Christians. And there's Abraham was talking with me that a lot of the people there couldn't even tell you a lot about names like Moses or Abraham. The Old Testament knowledge is just non-existent. And so that's something that I hope we don't take for granted among our congregation here, is how much Bible knowledge we have. But at the same time, it's cool to see this congregation that is largely composed of first-generation Christians who are getting older. And what that means is there's now a next generation of Christians that are growing up. I was surprised at how many kids there were there in Belize. Several of the women are expecting children as well, so that's an encouraging thing that this congregation is able to grow kind of the old-fashioned way in that sense. And so they had visitors present at every service, and truly the fields are white for harvest. I want to say just a quick thing about this young man here. His name on the left is Rigel. Abraham was running late for services the last night we were there. Last night I was there on Wednesday night. Abraham has to pick up his mother for services, and so we're all there. They start at 7:30 at night on Wednesday and don't get done till 9. So try that one out for size. It's like 7:35. We're waiting to get started, and Rigel just stands up and starts off the announcements. Well, that was his first time ever doing the announcements in Spanish and in English. And so here's kind of that next generation. Here's this young man just kind of stepping up and saying, they don't have elders there in that congregation. Here's this young man like, I can do it. And Abraham afterwards was almost in tears because he's like, that's the first time that someone else has ever started our services. And so here's this young man that's kind of like, I can serve in this way. I can do it. And he's quiet. He's very bashful, insecure that he's not doing a good job with his English. And all the English speakers are like, you're killing it. Keep it up. You're doing so good. And so when I left Belize, I told Rigel that night after I that picture with him, I said, who knows, maybe one day you'll be interpreting lessons for me. And he was like, I would love to do that someday. And so that was a super encouraging part of the trip for me, was getting to know this man and his family. That's his wife next to him in the other picture, and his father, Benny. Great family there at San Narciso. And so as I finish, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I want to just bring up some spiritual applications of what I saw in Belize. I think there's some lessons that we can learn that apply to us today. And one thing that I was kind of blown away by what I saw there in Belize was true hospitality. Because the New Testament calls us to be a people who show hospitality, right? Romans 12:13, Hebrews 13:2 get at that idea. But 1 Peter 4:9 is a simple passage where it says, show hospitality to one another. And we could end the sentence there, right? But it doesn't end there. It says, show hospitality to one another without grumbling. Without grumbling. Well, that begs the question, what is hospitality? Because I think commonly what we think hospitality is today is if we have someone over to our house and we cook them a meal, and that's being hospitable. And that may be true in a sense that that's how hospitality is manifested in our country and our culture today, but it's so much deeper than that. Hospitality is a compound word in the Greek, and it makes for a really good word study. But the idea of hospitality, it's the love of strangers. The love of strangers, treating outsiders like they are your own, having an affection toward them. A great example of that would be Lydia in Acts chapter 16 and verse 15. She takes in Paul and Barnabas, who are strangers, even though she just met them, but she pressed upon them and took them in. And this is what the brethren in San Narciso did for us. They took us in and they cared for us in whatever way they could. Even though I know Paul and Robin have been before, Alton and Dinah have been before, I was a stranger. I didn't know any of them. They were taking on the word of others, and yet they just took us all in, even though they don't have a lot of money, even though it took a lot of time and energy and resources. They showed the Christian love of hospitality so richly to us. And it's humbling to be on the receiving end of that. When you know you have more than this person, and when it comes to the money and resources and all these things, and yet they are just serving you. It's a humbling thing to receive such treatment. And so we spent a lot of time with the brethren in San Narciso at like different get-togethers and meals before or after worship services, largely at Abraham's house. And they just like went out of their way to do small things like this. And we may say like, well, that's kind of a sorry-looking, photo booth. No, like they don't have any of that at their house. They don't have excess money and savings. They don't have money. They shouldn't be buying this. And what do? They go to the store, they buy this, and you can't really see the sign, but it says, "Welcome, brethren," on it. And so they look forward to us coming. And one of the girls, of course, wanted to be in the picture, when the cameras come out. But this is what they did the whole time we were down there. Anytime we were together. They got this great meal for us. Sorry, Rob, it's all cans of Coke, not Pepsi. But there's a bottling factory there, a Coke factory in Belize. So there's no Diet Coke, right? There's no artificial sweetener in Belize. It's either Coke Zero with no sugar or Coke. And so that's the majority of what people drink is just a Coke or a Fanta. That's about it. But they would always have food and meals ready. Here's another picture inside. This is all at Abraham's house right here. So this is kind of where he lives, and they just finished building kind of this part of the house. They just finished building that on. And he was quite proud of that, and rightfully so. It's a great addition to their home. And so that's his wife cooking bread, homemade bread over the fire. All the women come together and make these great little sandwiches. I won't say how many us Americans ate, but we ate a lot, and it was good. But you best believe when someone who doesn't have a lot makes you food, that you eat every bite, and you say thank you, whether if you like it or not. We were blown away by how hospitable they were. And I'll mention this as well, kind of a cultural difference down there in Belize, right? They don't have banks where you go and get a line of credit and have mortgage payments to buy a house or something like that. So what you do is you add on to your house. You build your house in phases. You build what you have money for. And if you don't have money, guess what? You have an uncovered roof on your house. It's just an opening. And you wait until you can afford it. And so that lets us see when we're in Belize and we go to different people's houses or we drive by the brethren's houses, we can see that they don't have money because their homes are not finished. They don't have coverings over it. They don't have, and they say that they're not done yet, that they're saving. They're waiting until they can. And so despite knowing that they don't have money, they don't have a savings account, a lot of the concepts that we think are personal finance 101, they don't have. And then when we go down there, what do? What little money they do have, they spend to make sure that you are taken care of, that you are treated like royalty. And that is a touching gesture that Scripture has a lot to say about. Something else that I noticed in Belize was I saw similar problems. Traveling to Belize was eye-opening, getting to see how different, but yet how similar their struggles were to a lot of ours. And 1 Peter 5, 8, and 9 gets at this idea, right? Verse 8 is the passage we normally focus on in this context, where it says, be sober, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. But what does verse 9 say? Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. A lot of the same things that we struggle with, that we battle here, they may manifest themselves a little differently, but it's in a lot of ways very similar to what they're battling in Belize. And so let me be transparent. As much as I love the brethren in San Narciso, that it's an encouraging thing that I get a report about the work that's going on there. They're not a perfect church. They have issues. And some issues were even present while we were there, that we watch them kind of navigate. And we're not trying to be the Americans that come in and fix everything, because they could come here and probably fix a lot of things among us, right? And so we want to definitely be cautious about doing that. But they don't have elders at this congregation. They have men's meetings. And if you've ever had the opportunity to be in a men's meeting, it's not always the most productive space. And so there's so many different things that they're battling about. And Abraham shared with me the biggest challenge about being an evangelist in Belize, specifically being an evangelist in San Narciso, was this. He said, it's hard to be an evangelist in a town where everyone knows everyone. He said, everyone knows everyone. And he says, any drama that happens in the church is echoed throughout the entire community. And he says that is so difficult on him, kind of bearing the burden of leadership in this congregation. He joked with me that when he started preaching, he had a full head of hair. And now, 20 years later, he has none left. We're kind of brothers in that sense. But we talked about how some of the members, we talked not just with Abraham, but I was able to talk with some of the members about their struggles, about their battles. And again, it sounds so similar to many of our own. And another similar problem that I saw in Belize, and this is in jest, I'll put that up before this picture comes, is look what else they have there. Another problem they have, right? And some of you may know Paul and Robin are Oklahoma Sooner fans, and so we saw that in all places in Belize, right? And I put that up in jest, but what we saw when we were in Belize is we saw a lot of the same problems that are being experienced here. But what that also means is that there's the same solution, the same hope that exists. They need the gospel just as desperately there as we do here in Utah. I saw also the bond between Christians. 2 John 12 says this, though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face so that our joy may be complete. There was some anticipation leading up to this trip. I would text Abraham, hey, what do you need? He'd ask a question, I'd ask him something else. And so there was all this anticipation leading up. And there's something that about digital communication and Zoom and FaceTime and WhatsApp that isn't the same as when you're in person with someone. And we know that, right? We experienced that through COVID. The digital means it's great. It gets you by for a little bit, but it's not the same as when you're there in the flesh, face to face, talking to someone. And we can't forget that. And so it was encouraging to finally be in person with these people that we've been praying about, that we hear reports about, the different people that Abraham will mention in the reports, that he will email to us. That's such a special bond to be able to witness and be a part of. And I hope that we today, that in this place, that we don't lose that tight-knit love that ought to exist among one another. I watched, and I'm not going to try and embarrass them too much, but I watched Paul as we were getting ready to leave Belize. I watched him say goodbye to Armin. He's one of the men at that congregation. And I just saw the love of a father talking as if it was to his own son, encouraging him to not shy away from maturing and thinking about being an elder someday, because the church here at San Narciso, in our estimation, they're getting close to having that conversation about getting elders appointed there. And that's a great thing. But I watched the way Armin encouraged him and put his arm around him. I watched Robin embrace the kids of Sister Balbina. That's a name that we probably haven't heard in a while, but Sister Balbina passed away about maybe roughly 2 years ago. I watched Robin embrace those kids as if they were her own. And I teared up as I said goodbye to Abraham and some of the different men, Rigel and Benny. And Abraham comes up and, he's the shorter guy, as you could tell from the picture. So he gives me kind of awkward side hug and he walks away. And he's like, if I see you this year, I see you. And he goes, if I don't, I'll see you when we get home. And he gets in his car and drives away. And I'm reminded in that, and I'm not going to read this passage, but I'm reminded of passages like Acts chapter 20, right? After Paul spoke with the saints at Ephesus, largely the shepherds there, right? They knew that Paul was leaving and that he wasn't going to come back, and there was much weeping on the part of all. Some of you have probably left congregations, right? Left places where your church family is closer to you than your physical family. And you cry at that. And that's the bond that ought to exist among believers, because our bond is rooted. We are united in the resurrection of Jesus, and we should be willing to suffer for that, willing to proclaim that, but together as well. And so I hope we understand that having that type of bond, it doesn't happen accidentally, but we need to be intentional in seeking that out. And lastly, I'll finish with this. I saw a faith that speaks. A faith that speaks. And I'm basing that off a passage in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 and verse 8. Thessalonians chapter 1, verses 8 through 10. Listen to what it says there. It says, for not only has the word of the Lord sounded forth from you in Macedonia and Achaia, and I'll pause there for a second. It talks about that the word of the Lord went forth from them like a trumpet blast. That they were Christians who were proclaiming the good news. And that's what Christians who are serious about the gospel do. They share the good news with others. And we should take note. Is that happening among us? Does the word of God sound forth from us in Davis County, in Ogden, in Salt Lake City, and the surrounding areas? But not only that, you keep reading in second part of verse 8 here. It says, but your faith in God has gone forth everywhere, so that we need not say anything. Paul says that the saints at Thessalonica, their faith spoke volumes. And you want to know how to be an example to others? It's by the faith you exhibit, by the very life that you live. And I'm here to report to you about the faith that the saints in Belize have. That many of them have left false religions, false denominations, and they have found the truth in Jesus Christ. And they adore the simplicity that the Bible teaches. And as a result, guess what? Their faith has traveled places. Paul and Robin, some of the first that have gone down to Belize, have come back, and they started telling others, like, hey, there's some Christians down in Belize. It's encouraging to see that they have faith, that they understand who Jesus is, and they profess that. And some of you have been able to travel down there and see that yourself. And I got to go down to Belize, and you know what I saw? Zealous Christians faithful for what is true and what is right. But they're not the only ones whose faith has gone forth. Because all the people in Belize want to know about the church here in Utah. And then I'm able to tell them about your faith. And I think they have this kind of glorified American idea that at our church, we have a baptism every Sunday that, we're just constantly dunking people. Some of them have that idea. Most of them are kind of grounded in reality. They know that's not the case. But I'm able to tell them about, we may not have a baptism every single Sunday or something like that. But they hear of the studies, they hear of the examples, they hear of the lives, they hear of your faith. And so I want you to know that your faith in God has gone forth too, and God bless you for that. But why has our faith gone places? Why has it spread? In verse 9 of 1 Thessalonians 1, I think gets at the key idea here, where it says, for they themselves report concerning us the kind of reception we had among you, and how you turned to God from idols to serve the living and true God. That verse reveals why their faith was such an example, that biblical faith doesn't occur in the mind only. Right? It bleeds into every aspect of our lives. It changes our life, the very way that we live. And that's what happened with the saints at Thessalonica. They turned to God from idols. They found the true God after realizing that they were misguided, and so they repented of their sinful ways.
An idol is anything that we allow to be placed above God in our lives and in our hearts. When we were in Belize, we went to a place called Lamani, and it's ancient ruins, Mayan ruins, right? It looks like something out of an Indiana Jones movie. And so here we are kind of slapped in the face with like ancient idolatry. But that's not the idolatry that we probably struggle with today. Going to a site and offering a sacrifice or something like that, that's awfully foreign to us. And so when we read about that in 1 Thessalonians 1 and verse 9, that how you turn to God from idols, what idols are we turning from in our life? What do we need to rid from our hearts? When we put Christ on in baptism, we become a new creation. And a new creation means that it should accompany with that a new life, a new way of living. And so understand, Christ doesn't only want to forgive you, He wants to transform your life. And that's what I saw in Belize. But I would say a lot of that is what I see here at Kaysville. I considered myself blessed to be able to labor with you all in the gospel and to be able to travel different places and meet faithful Christians in other parts of this world. Christians who are not perfect, no, but those who, like us, are waiting for Jesus to return, Jesus who delivers us from the wrath to come. Maybe you're here this morning and you recognize your need for Jesus. Are you ready to turn from idols to the true and living God? On Wednesday night of this week, last week, so just a couple days ago, I received some texts from the saints in San Narciso that one of the visitors who we met in Belize while we were down there became our new brother in Christ. His name is Sebastian, and so you can kind of see him there with the orange towel around his shoulders. On Monday of this past week, Ezekiel texted me that they had 5 baptisms in the month of February. So isn't that encouraging to hear about? You may feel like you try and reach out to your friends, the people in your life, and no one wants to hear it. Don't let that discourage you or keep you from stopping to share the good news, the simplicity of the truth that is found in Jesus and in Jesus alone. Don't lose faith. Souls are still seeking. Souls are still coming to Jesus. And maybe that's you this morning. If you're here and subject to heaven's invitation, why don't you come to the front as we stand and sing the song selected.